Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining. We do have folks that are continuing to join the meeting, but in the interest of time, we will go ahead and get started. So thank you to all of you who have joined this presentation on leveraging technology to assure 889B compliance. I'm Tom Leahy. I'm the SVP of Sales and Business Development with SureShield, and attending with me is our CEO, Sanjay Kumar, and product strategist for SureShield. We'll be presenting today. The two of us have long history in compliance and risk in a number of different areas, and really appreciate everybody joining the session today. So what we're going to cover is a brief introduction, which we've just done, a little bit about the McCain Act, which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with, also called the NDAA Act. The banned entities, the entities that as a provider, supplier, you are not allowed to be working with, of course, jeopardizing potentially contracts. We're going to talk about how to identify those entities, the processes for doing that. And then we're going to go into some how technology can be leveraged to ease that compliance use. We'll give you a short demonstration of a product provided through us called Integrity Shield for 889B compliance. And then we will go ahead and field any questions that you may have. Please, as a note in your Zoom session, there's a Q&A area where you can go ahead and ask questions you may have. And for all of those who are here to participate or participating today, we're also going to offer a free trial of that solution to you to test out for yourself. Also, just as a note, at the conclusion of the meeting, we will be sending out to you later today or probably tomorrow the content of this presentation, the webinar itself, and then also access to how you can get access to your free trial. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sanjay briefly, and we'll go ahead and get the presentation started.
Thank you, Tom. Good afternoon, everybody. So what is the McCain Act? And as Tom indicated, I'm sure all of you literally are very familiar with the Act. The Act was enacted in August of 2018 and is commonly more referred to as your Section 889, right? So enacted in 2018, primarily with the intent to prevent espionage and stealing of US national information. So based upon security breaches, hacks, and the like, the Congress determined in 2018 that there was increased privacy, security, and espionage risk that were arising from use of certain type of equipment from vendors, Chinese vendors in particular. And the act was put in place primarily to curtail the use of certain kinds of equipment from specific companies. And that's really what the act is pretty much all about.
So, and with that, Sanjay, just as I'm sure folks are very familiar, but just to get a poll of those who have joined, I thought we might ask how many are familiar with this particular act. So we're going to launch a brief poll and allow you to go ahead and ask to respond to that poll. We'll just give it about 10, 15 seconds. Great. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll, but it looks like over 90% of the participants, Sanjay, are familiar with the act itself.
Great.
Which is good. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and move on.
So the act really has two provisions to it. What's called the 889B. 889A and 889B. In 889A, the government basically is not allowed to, through a contract or any other type of instrument, utilize any type of telecommunication equipment or services from certain designated Chinese companies. So really 889A pertains to the government auditing itself and making sure that it is not utilizing any type of equipment or services from these banned companies, Chinese companies. 889B, on the other hand, which was made effective August of 13, 2020, last year, uh, indicates that the government may not contract with an entity that uses telecommunication equipment or services as a substantial part of doing their business, or that makes it a critical technology component as part of their system, right? So uh, the government will not be able to contract with you or do business with you if it discovers that you are actually using certain type of equipment or services from these banned companies. So number one, you are to basically check your own self regarding whether you're doing business with certain banned companies or not. In addition to that, you're supposed to check your devices and equipment to make sure that they're not from one of these banned companies, right? So a twofold check has to basically occur. And it also applies downstream, meaning that it also applies to your supply chain vendors as well. The use is regardless of whether that use is in performance of a federal contract or not. So you might be bidding on a contract, but you might not be intending to utilize those equipment or services for that particular contract. That is immaterial. You will still be disqualified.
Exactly.
The 889B provisions applies to every sector. It doesn't matter what your company makes or sells. So you might just be a vendor that is providing very basic services like level 1 or level 2 type of services. It doesn't matter. It's immaterial. It still applies to you. All systems your company uses must be checked for prohibited telecommunication equipment and services, meaning whether it is mobile devices, network devices, other systems that are hooked to your network, all of those are supposed to basically get checked. This applies no matter if your use is outside of the federal domain or not, as I mentioned earlier. Failure to properly monitor can result in a loss of contract as well as penalties and fines. So who are these banned entities? There are about 5 major corporations that the government has actually named. And this list is by far not necessarily static. These companies were named some time ago, but the list gets added to, as well as certain companies basically get removed from the list. So right now there are 5 primary organizations that are banned from you doing business with them or using their equipment or services or devices. Huawei Technologies, ZTE, Hyteria Communications, Hangzhou Hike Vision Digital Technology Company, Daohua Technology Company. And these companies in themselves have over 200 plus subsidiaries underneath them. Automatically, you're also banned from using anything being produced by those companies as well. So as you can imagine, it's a challenge to be able to really, number one, discover what you have, what you're using, and then be able to match it up and tie it up to basically what these companies have out there in terms of devices and the like.
Exactly. And John and Sanjay, as you noted, these lists get updated as well. So
Yes.
there's companies that come on, later into this as well.
Right. So as I was indicating, it's a challenge to actually go about trying to identify, and that is what this webinar is all about. There are 2 things that we really need to worry about when working to identify things. Number one, uh, are you or your subcontractors doing business uh, with any of these vendors through which certain devices are being utilized within their confines or not, right? And failure to properly comply can, as we indicated, result in a canceled or lost contract, which is extremely important for you, or for you to be prohibited from bidding on new contracts. So you have to review and understand the rules and actions associated with Section 889, very, very important. You have to do a systemic review to determine if your company uses any equipment or services from such companies, and you have to catalog that and document it and prove that you're not, right? If your company uses prohibited equipment or services, you are to evaluate the cost of removing those items and discontinuing the services and pursuing a waiver, which you are to implement as a phase out plan. So hypothetically, if you are in a contract with the government, you do this audit using the systems that are basically available to you, or the kind of systems that Tom is going to highlight, you are to then come up with this plan and indicate exactly
And
how you're
just
going to
a
pursue
note
that.
to that, Sanjay, is while there are instances where you can apply for a waiver, it's highly unlikely that those are going to be accepted. There's a very, very rare case in which they would accept, for you to be able to continue to use those services.
Right. The next thing is that you are to educate your employees on Section 889, and your company's compliance plan has to be updated to reflect that, including the requirement to report if prohibited telecom equipment is identified. When responding to orders under your GSA contract, you are required to represent if your company does or does not use covered telecom solutions, and they have the right to basically audit you. You're supposed to report all of that through the award management system that is accessible to you all as a contracted vendor. Okay, so at this point in time, Tom will ask you to respond to a couple of more polls to see how you might be doing this process, and then go into demonstrating to you a really simple, easy to use solution that you can actually avail of that can help you with this process.
Great. So having gone through this, we're actually just curious with those that are familiar with that, whether you have gone ahead and actually done an inventory check. So we're going to ask that question briefly and give folks an opportunity to respond. Great. So we have about half that have said they have, half who said they haven't, and a few that aren't sure whether they have. And it's probably because it's someone else that may be responsible for that. And for those who did answer yes, we're just curious as to how you may have gone about doing that. What was the process? Was it a manual check where you were searching around for technology that may be in there, or were you able to use any type of software to help identify this? And it looks like the majority of the folks here that have responded have indicated that they were kind of manually checking. So it's kind of a self-attestation process, which again, even the larger you are or the smaller you are, new things can get introduced into the environment that you may not be aware of. So the process for actually being able to do this in a continuous fashion, in a regular fashion, can be challenging. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and take over the presentation briefly. Let me move off of here. And just to give you an oversight, as we said, what SureShield provides is a platform for doing a number of different things related to compliance, security, and vendor oversight as well. And we're specifically going to go into number 6, which is the Integrity Shield. But just to give you a very brief overview, we have tools that can help do compliance audits that are often required for any of you that are doing, let's say, HIPAA or CMMC, working with the DoD and the likes. We have security tools that can actually identify vulnerabilities in your environment and help fix those. We have tools that will actually help identify critical data and put rules on that to protect that data from leaking or getting pulled. We've got dark web monitoring tools. We have tools that allow you to do an oversight and audit of your vendors and document that off for third-party risk. And then we have solutions one that we're going to go in today called Integrity Shield for 889B compliance. And what we've done and how this works is it's, first of all, it's constantly, the database is constantly being updated. So we're monitoring any of the banned entities that may come in under those 5 that were first of all identified, and the subsidiaries and affiliates under them. And that's periodically updated. So we update the database. We allow you to then load your supplier database, and it will then do a check against that vendor database and the banned entities, so they can run any red flags to tell you if there's any things to be concerned about. We've also extended that with a utility that can be run through your environment that will identify, it's a utility that will go out and identify all the assets in your environment so that you don't necessarily have to do that. And we match them up against those, the MAC IDs of those against the banned entity list. So it automates that process even further. And will then, of course, give you red flag warnings if anything exists, if there's any changes to your environment. And additionally, we also allow you the ability to push this to your downstream providers. So if you have companies that are working with your company and you want to make sure the same, that they're not working with any of that because it applies in that ecosystem, you can actually push this, invite people out to use this as well, and allow them to do, their audit of their environments to assure that everyone in your ecosystem is copacetic. And as we mentioned, it's all real time. So it's constantly being updated. So as you're adding, new vendors or new assets to your system, it will then go ahead and match against that and provide you with outputs and warnings and notifications as to if things have changed in that particular environment. So I'm going to go into just briefly a very brief product demonstration of this. So I'm going to act as if I'm one of the companies. And in this case, I'm working with a group called Sky Services. I'm Sky Services. And I'm presented with a dashboard. You'll see over here the apps that I have open. And one of these is our 889B monitoring app. So the first thing it will, when you come into your dashboard, when you've loaded, it will show you all those vendors, your supply chain vendors, the devices in your vendor network, and your own network devices. So again, if you've invited other participants in your network, you're going to be able to see it at the level of your own environment and even at the level of their environment. The process for this, as you can see right now, there's 232 banned vendors in here. And if I were to click into that, it will actually just show me who these are, what the companies are that are underneath them. I can, basically do segmentation on this if I want to, where I'm just looking at those related to that particular company. We'll exit out of here. The process for onboarding is actually quite simple. So there's basically deployment steps. One, you can, at any time as a company, you can, if you have new vendors that are coming into your environment, you can add them one by one. So you'd basically go in and you'd give the name of that vendor and load them into the system. And then the system would automatically start checking against those. You also have the ability to do what I would call a mass upload. So we provide a template that allows you to bring those in and then match those again against the entities in the database. Now, if you want to make this even more simple and automated, as I mentioned, we provide this little scanning tool that will, once downloaded, it will go out and it will do a scan and identify all of your assets in your network. And again, those are getting matched up to the banned vendor list in there as well. So we have folks that will use this, for purposes of, sorry. I accidentally moved out. for purposes of just automating that process for them. And then also, as we said, pushing that out to their vendors to do the same process. So if I wanted to, I can actually go ahead, you can see, and send a request for that asset info to a vendor. So I can actually come in and indicate that I want to invite them into the program, and they would go ahead and click and get invited, and then they would then have the ability to go ahead and do the same type of process as well. So if I had these groups, I could say, hey, I'd like to do an inventory on you, and then you would push that out, and it would go ahead and invite that particular vendor in, and you would get information from them about whether they are meeting the criteria or not. So really a very, very simple process to do this. And again, if I wanted to just go in and take a look at that list, in the case of my supply chain, I can look at those that I have contracts with. I can go find and look at the ones that are the banned entities. So in this case, this particular banned entity that's in here is one of the Huawei technology company vendors. And you can see we have all the MAC addresses and MAC IDs on these. So with those, we can match those up to the assets that you have and give you that instant notification and information as to whether you have an issue in your own environment. And then lastly, you will have the ability to actually run reports that you can use as part of your attestation process. So you are supposed to be providing this, as we said, into the SAM and letting the government know that you've done your inventory and that you do not have any of these entities that are in place. So really what this helps do is simplify that whole process and constantly update it as well. So that is now the Integrity Shield itself has other utilities, but specifically for the Section 889B process, you can see it's fairly straightforward, but the beauty is that it's automated for quite a bit, and it basically does the work for you as opposed to you having to do your own audit necessarily of that environment. So I'm going to come back to the presentation briefly. And really, first of all, I think we're going to be able to buy you all some time back for the meeting. That the Integrity Shield for 889B compliance, provides immediate ROI. It really can help. It will automate the identification of the banned vendors. It allows you to push that to your downstream providers to even greater assure your overall compliance. And with the additional automation, you get real-time asset identification that ultimately, first of all, low cost and assures that don't put yourself in a position to potentially lose contracts because, as you said, they're taking this quite seriously. Obviously, they would not have passed an act for this if there wasn't that type of concern. So attesting to something and not actually being correct can be potentially very troubling for your organization. So just to summarize and wrap up before we go into the Q&A, compliance with this 889B is a requirement for you to continue to do business with the federal government. You may have already submitted, or you may have already had requests from the prime or yourself as to asking you if you have this technology in place, and this is a way to help assure that. Obviously you need good processes in place to provide adequate oversight. And as we discussed, new threats are introduced regularly. So it's not a static process. While there's 232 banned entities in there right now, next week it could be 240 or 260, so or less. It's in monitoring that can be quite difficult. So you can leverage technology like those provided by us to automate the ecosystem oversight, to help assure your compliance and have reports that you can validate that with proven information to show that as well. And, obviously immediately identify new potential threats, and greatly help in your supply chain oversight process. So before we wrap up, we will go ahead and answer questions. Please go to the Q&A, and I think there have been some questions that have been asked and perhaps already answered. But if you'd like a demonstration, or we're going to send out to everyone that's participating here and offer to go into Integrity Shield and do a free trial. You will get a link that will allow you to sign in, and then it will open up into that dashboard that would then we would use to start loading some of your vendors. And we're more than happy to assist you in that onboarding process. So keep an eye out for that. Please make a note to check your spam, because sometimes these will end up in a spam folder. But everyone, as we said at the conclusion of this, is going to receive the content that we've presented here today, the webinar itself, and then we will also be offering you the opportunity to trial the software. So with that, why don't we go ahead and open up the Q&A. So Chandi, I see you're typing an answer to a couple of questions. So I think there was a question about how can you know that your cell phone provider is using or what's in your computers. So I think we helped answer that. There's a listing of prohibitive providers and equipment and MAC addresses, and that's how we're going out and identifying that within the environment. And I'm just not sure, Chandi, if everyone is able to see the answers to everyone else's questions. So one of the questions that folks asked, am I correct, there's no list of prohibitive equipment. Every equipment manufacturer is identified by MAC addresses, and you can cross-check against those.
Yep, I can answer in summary. So first thing is any manufacturer of networking interfaces is assigned a unique range of MAC addresses, and that is the basis for us to determine if any of the equipment that a customer has is part of the banned list. Now, mind you, same manufacturer could be making PC network interfaces, like a laptop network interface, as well as switches and routers. So most of the targeted banned equipment is equipment that is the network infrastructure. So not necessarily your network interface on a laptop or a server. Okay, so if your laptops are not connected to your office network for scanning and all that, it's not much of a worry, because laptops or these kind of stuff are not necessarily the target for this ban. It's mostly the infrastructure that supports your network. So that is necessarily installed on premises. So the scanning will definitely detect that equipment. And cloud, again, most of the cloud services are providing at the most a server. In most of the cases, it's a platform where you're not even looking at the real physical infrastructure. So cloud infrastructure is not worrisome as well. So that should be fine as well.
Great, thank you, Chandi. And Chandi's our CTO for those who are on the call. There's another question about price. How is this priced? It's generally priced upon the number of vendors that you have. It's a very low dollar amount, so we look at those numbers. And then there's some additional minor costs for the automation piece of this if you want to utilize the tool that will go out and do that auto identification. So Chandi, there's another question coming saying, if I have multiple subnets in my network and I have network filtering that prevents devices on one subnet talking to devices on other subnets, will that interfere with the auditing?
It does. So we support or we recommend installing the scanner agent on every subnet. That way you are fully covered. So it's typically, I mean, the best data you get is only when the scanner is within the same subnet. If it is scanning across subnets, you may be missing out on critical details like MAC addresses and other stuff. So the recommendation is install it locally within the subnet, and we support multiple scan agents deployed in a network.
Great. We still have time for a few more questions. So there's Chandi, maybe you can ask, where is the government listing these subsidiaries?
Yeah, so the issue is a lot of these major entities that are identified as Chinese government funded entities, they do business through subsidiaries across the world in many places. So that's where the uncertainty comes, because I mean, a lot of these subsidiaries are created to overcome some of these kind of bans. So it's important to stay in touch with that. So it requires some research to keep finding out and getting an updated list of these subsidiaries. So there's no single place where they're listed. So it requires some investigation and analyzing their annual reports of the corporate, the parent entities, and multiple such methods to basically identify all the subsidiaries.
Let's see, we've got a couple more, a little more time for any other questions that folks might have. I think we've got all that have been added here. So we are going to go ahead and offer you access to this free trial, as I said. I'm assuming that all would like to at least have that opportunity to do so. So keep your eyes out for an email, as we said, that's from us that will give you access to the presentation, to the webinar, as well as your invitation to this free trial. And Chandi has seen.
Yeah, I'm going to answer that. So
yeah.
Even cell phones, if you have a smartphone that connects to your office Wi-Fi, we can detect that as well, and we can get its MAC address and then do a matching. If it's not connecting to the office network, then it's not of concern.
Great. So the question was, in case folks can't all see this, is how do you address how this applies to cell phones? And that was a question that Chandi was answering. Well, it looks like we will buy everyone back a little time for the presentation. We'll, ask one more time if there's any other questions that folks may want to ask. Otherwise, we greatly appreciate you all taking time out to do this. It's a very, if you're doing business with the federal government, it's a very important compliance issue for you. And as we said before, it's not a static issue. New entities are added regularly. So hopefully using some tools like those we provide here can help, first of all, assure that compliance and then ease your burden of that oversight. So again, we want to thank everyone for attending the meeting. As I said, please feel free to reach out to us if you'd like. You can visit our website. We actually just launched a new website, an upgraded website under SureShield. It's SURE-shield.com if you want to take a look at that and see some of our blog content in as well. We got a lot of good content to help in the processes. If you have interest in any other solutions, please feel free to reach out, either at info@sureshield.com or, as you said, reach out to us if you want to schedule a further personal demo of this or any other offering of ours as well. And again, thank you everybody for attending the session. With that, if there's no more questions, I'll go ahead and end the presentation. Thank you, everybody.